My name is Professor Judith Hawley, and I am the chair for another in the London Luminaries lecture series. The London Luminaries is a voluntary organisation that represents a group of historic properties working together to explore the history of the West of London. Each property provides the talk, and the Luminaries supplies a platform for them. Now, our speaker tonight, Dr. Hannah Mawdsley, is in fact a shooting star. She's just been ranked 7th lady rifle shooter in the entire world. She's also, and this is more relevant for tonight, the property curator for the National Trust's Ham House and Garden, a 17th century Jacobean mansion on the bank of the River Thames near Richmond, London. She regularly contributes as an expert historical consultant for television and radio. In fact, you can see her on the iPlayer, BBC iPlayer, in the excellent BBC series Treasures of the National Trust. She appears in Series 3, Episode 4. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here to speak to you all this evening, and I'm really delighted to be able to share the conservation and stories of the wonderful Senex globes at Ham House. So, for anybody who hasn't visited, this is Ham House. Originally built in 1610 and then extended to the south in the 1670s, it is a rare and special 17th century survival. It contains spectacular 1630s interiors created by craftspeople that were also working at royal palaces, such as Whitehall Palace, which was sadly destroyed by fire in the 1690s. It also contains many pieces of art and furniture from the Restoration period under King Charles II. In many cases, these objects can still be seen in the original rooms that they were bought or designed for. We're incredibly lucky that Ham has surviving inventories from the 17th century right through to the 20th century, giving a rare window into the lives and uses of material objects in the 17th century and through the subsequent centuries. And this is where Ham is in the world. It's near Richmond in southwest London. And as you can see, this stretch of the Thames is peppered with many wonderful historic sites, several of whom are giving talks in this London Luminary series. And some where traces only now survive, like Richmond Palace, as you can see at the top of the screen. Today, I have the joy of sharing the stories of some glorious collection items at Ham House that have recently been expertly conserved. This pair of globes was made and purchased in the 18th century and have been at Ham since that time. They were in need of some serious TLC, as you will see shortly, and we were fortunate to secure some conservation funding from a generous gift to the National Trust. Through the process of remedial conservation, they've not only been vastly improved in aesthetics and condition, but they've also thrown some really exciting discoveries our way. Our understanding of these objects and their histories has really grown as a result, and I'll be sharing some of those surprises with you during this talk. Firstly, I'll start with a little bit of historical context. In the 17th and 18th centuries, European understanding of the world was growing. Global trade and colonial ambition brought more knowledge of land, sea, and sky. New tools, including the sextant and improved ship designs, allowed more accurate measurements and images to be made of the world. This information was recorded and communicated in maps and on globes. In Europe, globes had emerged in the 15th and 16th centuries as tools for visualizing and mastering the world. Informed by classical knowledge and global travel, they showed a three-dimensional representation of the Earth and of the night sky. The two types of globes you can see here were intended to be used in slightly different ways. For the terrestrial globe, it is as though you are traversing the surface of the Earth in a way quite familiar to us, although not at this scale. But for the celestial globe, it's almost as though you have to imagine yourself in the center of that sphere, looking out all around you at the constellations that surround you. As European exploration and colonial activity intensified in the 16th and 17th centuries, globes became increasingly important as navigation instruments and also as instruments of education and power. But they not only played an essential role in allowing the user to understand the layout of land and the motion of the stars, they were also, as I hope you can see, highly decorative and prestigious objects to own. Possessing these objects expressed both the knowledge and the cultural and artistic sophistication of the owner. They were displayed prominently in scholarly and royal settings and in the houses of wealthy families like at Ham House. The earliest record of globes at Ham House appears in the 1677 inventory in the Matted Gallery, which is now known as the Long Gallery. I mentioned a moment ago our good fortune in having original inventories for Ham, and these documents give us so much information about what was where and how objects were used hundreds of years ago. The four globes I've indicated with an arrow on the left-hand picture that are mentioned in 1677 were almost certainly purchased by the Duke and Duchess of Lauderdale during their expansion and furnishing of Ham in the early 1670s. The eventual fate of these 17th century globes is unknown. Other collection items from that same time, so the late 17th century, also reflect the interest in understanding the world and the stars, such as this beautiful enamel on gold miniature depicting a personification of astronomy. And this miniature hangs in our very special room, the Green Closet. It was made in around 1675, probably by a French artist, and was collected by the Duke and Duchess of Lauderdale. And astronomy is shown here draped in a luxurious fabric, which is quite reminiscent of the night sky, and holding a globe of the zodiac with her dividers pointing at the constellation of Draco, which appears in the form of a seahorse in this instance. The pair of globes that have been recently conserved were collected by Elizabeth's great-grandson, Lionel, the 4th Earl of Dysart, pictured here on the right-hand side. He inherited Ham in 1727, and the following year he embarked on a grand tour of Europe, as was the fashion at the time. The picture on the left shows that, like his father, the 4th Earl's son John also went on a grand tour around Europe. He's shown here with friends amongst classical ruins, and this painting hangs in the gentleman's dining room at Ham House. In 1745, perhaps inspired by his European travels, the 4th Earl purchased this pair of terrestrial and celestial globes for the library at Ham. These globes were made and inscribed by renowned English globe maker John Senex, dated to 1740. Senex was a book publisher, cartographer, engraver, surveyor, and geographer for Queen Anne, so basically a bit of an overachiever, but a very, very clever man. He produced many important printed publications, including atlases, between 1714 and 1728, but he's best known and admired for his creation of extraordinary quality globes, and he was known as one of the greatest globe makers of his day. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society and presented a paper there in 1738 on the subject of celestial globes. He worked alongside his wife Mary, whose contribution to this success, like many businesswomen in history, has likely been underestimated. John Senex died in December 1740, and 1740, as you can see on the inscription on the screen, was the year that John Senex completed the Ham pair of globes. This might mean that the globes at Ham might be among the last that he ever made. Interestingly, though, Mary Senex continued the Senex Globes business in Fleet Street, London, until 1755, a full 15 years after John's death. Now, you may remember me saying just now that the 4th Earl purchased these globes in 1745, meaning that he bought them from Mary Senex, as this was 5 years after John's death. These might have been made by John before his death and been in stock for Mary to sell in subsequent years. However, tantalizingly, the 4th Earl's bill from 1745 records his payment to the maker of my great globes. And would Mary really have had sufficient stock for 15 years' worth of trading after John's death? Perhaps Mary continued using John's signatory device and branding for the 15 years after his death, maybe on her own work. It's certainly quite intriguing and merits further research. Either way, the Ham House globes are striking examples of early 18th century craftsmanship, and a few other surviving example globes by Senex can be found in some of the Oxford and Cambridge University colleges and at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. The designs on the globes reflect the world as it was known at the time in the 18th century. The celestial globe is decorated with constellations drawn from classical mythology, along with southern constellations named by Europeans through colonial expansion and global trade. The terrestrial globe shows the world as it was understood by Europeans at that time, with some coastlines drawn incomplete when they had not yet fully mapped an area, like this partial rendering of New Zealand you can see on the left-hand side. A particularly rare survival alongside this pair of globes is their original gilded and scorched leather covers. And you can see that in the photo on the right-hand side here in the library. These are even more amazing survivals than the globes themselves, as they're very fragile and don't survive as well or as often as the globes. And these were also conserved last year as part of the conservation project. But despite the protection of these covers, over the centuries, the globes had become dirty and damaged. As you can see from the pictures, the celestial globe was particularly dirty, obscuring basically all of the northern constellations. This may have come about due to soot from open fires over the years, settling on top of the spheres as the air cooled. Some areas of paper and the globe shells had also been damaged over time, hiding the designs on the surface of the spheres. The celestial globe, you can see, had had a particularly hard time of it. It just baffles me to see it then, and you'll see the now photo later on in the talk. Expert globes conservator Sylvia Samira was commissioned to conserve the two globes, transforming their condition and appearance and ensuring they'll be fit to last for another 300 years. Sylvia's treatments began with disassembling each globe in her studio to get a better idea of the work needed and full access to all parts of the globes. She started by removing the old discoloured varnish and the heavy grime from the globe surfaces and the horizon rings. You can see on the picture the sphere on the left is partly de-varnished, and you can see the horizon rings further forward and right in the picture. And you can see on the horizon ring, which forms part of the stand, where Sylvia has begun cleaning on the front side and not yet the back side. But on the dirtier side, you can see some square patches of cleaner areas. And these were test patches carried out by Sylvia before the project had fully started. And these were really important in allowing her to work out the safest and most effective way of lifting the centuries of dirt from the paper surface and to inform her treatment plan. Sylvia repaired areas of historic damage on both of the globe shells and the horizon rings, reinstated areas of loss, and lightly reconstructed some lost details with a micron archival ink pen. The wooden stands were cleaned, checked for stability, and wax polished. She removed corrosion from the brass elements and protected them from future deterioration by applying a protective coating of microcrystalline wax. Finally, Sylvia revarnished the globe surfaces and horizon rings and reunited the globes with their stands. Here are some photos of the during phase of the treatment. This was the slightly less dirty side of the celestial globe with the yellowed varnish in the process of being removed. And this is the much dirtier side. You can see the difference between the before and after of Sylvia's efforts. It's like night and day. And you can see the constellation slowly becoming revealed from underneath the yellowed varnish and grime. And as you can imagine, this is a painstaking and specialist process, making sure that you're removing the dirt and not the designs underneath, using experience and the right tools for the job. Reflecting on the work she had achieved, Sylvia said, "The globes presented a fascinating challenge. It was very rewarding to see the constellations on the celestial globe re-emerging from the darkness." And you can see in the picture on the right here the hand of Cephas, the husband of Cassiopeia and father of Andromeda, emerging here from the grime partway through the treatment. So after 440 long hours of painstaking work, Sylvia was able to show the results of all her efforts. Here you can see the wonderful work achieved by Sylvia on the terrestrial globe. We've got the before on the left and the after on the right-hand side. And on the celestial globe, you can see, I'm sure you'll agree, that the transformation is nothing short of miraculous. As I mentioned earlier, the conservation project delivered a few wonderful surprises along the way because the treatment process yielded some unexpected and exciting opportunities. The construction of the globes themselves was something that Sylvia could have anticipated with all her experience. With the shell made from plaster, with segments of printed paper known as gauze applied to the surface to create the globe's map design. This much was known. However, small areas of historic damage on both globes allowed a glimpse of a hidden world. Sylvia used an endoscope through an existing damage hole to view and record the inside of each sphere, something unseen since the globes were made by Senex in 1740. Inside, she found the interior of each globe was supported by a system of wooden struts, the spin aided by a precisely positioned bag of lead weights, and the plaster shell itself was supported by and constructed using book pages. And a talented academic and good friend of mine, Dr. Emily Vine at the University of Exeter, was commissioned by me ad hoc to see if she could identify which book this might be. And very happily for us, she was. She managed to work out that this book was a 1729 edition of a 17th century book by Thomas Burnet. And this really brought me joy because it turns out that the terrestrial globe of the Earth had rather fittingly been created using text written about the theory of the Earth. So some really nice serendipity there. The celestial globe was similarly investigated, and a similar construction method was found to have been used. The book pages used to create the celestial globe has so far proven slightly trickier to identify than the terrestrial globe, but it appears to be a reprint of some early biblical sermons, perhaps by Saint John Chrysostom, who lived in the 4th century AD, was Archbishop of Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, and was renowned for his preaching and public speaking. So why might these globes have been created with pages of books? John Senex was a printer and map maker, and inevitably this industry results in some waste paper from mistakes or cut-offs. Books were an expensive commodity in the 18th century, and the globes may well have been created using surplus pages from a print run, rather than by using a dismembered book. Sylvia found that the horizon ring paper was also made using waste paper from globe and map making, the segment-shaped gauze that create the curved surface of the map. So these materials may all have been scrap paper that Senex had perhaps printed on and then rethought from his own printing works. As we've seen, the conservation work delivered an absolute transformation for the pair of globes, but particularly for the celestial globe. And here are some of the details visible now on the celestial globe now that the conservation work has been completed. And this includes some lesser known constellations such as the Shield, the Sextant, and the Fox. And these were some of the numerous constellations that were named in the 17th century. And here are some of the others. These wonderful images are from a set of cards called Urania's Mirror, which was published in 1824. And these are fabulous because holes are punched out where the stars would be so that users could hold the cards up to the light and see the constellation through pinpricks of light rather than just relying on the pictures. Many modern constellations, including the zodiacs, have more ancient origins. In the 2nd century CE, the Greco-Roman astronomer Ptolemy published 48 constellations. The constellations on the screen, named as I mentioned in the 17th century, were named by European astronomers and navigators, where increasing trade and colonial ambition took European navigators and cartographers to new parts of the world. For example, the hunting dogs, the lizard, the lion cub, the lynx, the shield, the sextant, and the fox were all named by the Polish-German astronomer Johannes Hevelius, and an earlier Dutch-Flemish astronomer, Petrus Plancius, named the giraffe and the unicorn. The naming of stars was not always mythology, animal, or technology inspired, though. Sometimes naming was politically motivated. The shield, or scutum, for example, you can see in the picture on the right here, was a constellation named by Hevelius in 1684 in honor of the Polish King John III Sobieski of Poland. And you can see that attribution on the globe under the word scutum there. In Britain, too, some celestial arrangements were named tactically to flatter those in power. One such person was King Charles II. You can see his portrait here, which hangs in the Long Gallery at Ham House. But Charles hadn't always been in power. During the English Civil Wars, he lived much of his time in exile, including in France and the Netherlands. And after the execution of his father, King Charles I, he allied with Scotland and made several unsuccessful attempts to take back the English throne. However, the eventual death of Oliver Cromwell in 1658 and the unsuccessful succession of Cromwell's son Richard as Lord Protector presented new opportunities. And after agreements to cooperate with Parliament and promises of religious tolerance, Charles was invited to return. In 1660, Charles Stuart was restored to the throne and crowned as King Charles II. The court physician Sir Charles Scarborough claimed that, on the night of Charles's return to England from the Netherlands, a previously unnamed celestial arrangement had shone exceptionally brightly, as if to celebrate the king's return. As you can imagine, this might be the sort of thing a new king would want to hear. Scarborough called it Cor Caroli, Charles's heart, or to give it its full name, Cor Caroli Regis Martyris, the heart of Charles the martyred king. And here you can see it on the right, newly uncovered on the celestial Senex globe at Ham House. A few years later, in 1679, English astronomer Edmund Halley, of Halley's comet fame, was similarly inspired to flatter his patron Charles II. He named a constellation Robur Carolinum, or Charles's Oak, in reference to the oak tree where Charles is said to have hidden from Cromwell's troops in the aftermath of the Battle of Worcester in 1651. Now, invoking the stars in aid of your patron wasn't just sycophancy, the stars were a serious business. Celestial bodies had long been considered as having an influence on the events of the earth and on human lives. In particular, their influence on a person's character, significant events likely to befall them, and even the eventual manner of their death. This concept of the influence of the stars is seen in many ancient cultures, including Indian, Mayan, Chinese, and Greek. And between the 14th and 17th centuries in Britain and Europe, this understanding of the power of the stars was reflected in politics, art, and literature. Court astrologers helped to advise princes, including Johannes Kepler and Galileo. Poets like Geoffrey Chaucer and Dante Alighieri noted it in their works, and playwrights, including Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare, used it as key plot points. In the works of playwright William Shakespeare, he included many mentions of the power and influence of stars and planets. Many of us might be familiar with his description of Romeo and Juliet as star-crossed or ill-fated lovers. In his other works, it forms even more of a focus. In Shakespeare's King Lear, the eponymous king attributes all human existence to the influence of the stars, and the Earl of Gloucester blames eclipses for discord, mutinies, and treason. Gloucester's illegitimate son Edmund calls this out as superstition, although he is later proven a villain, and through this his dismissal of celestial influence is cast by Shakespeare in a negative light. In Act 1, Scene 2, Edmund states that this is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we are sick in fortune, often the surfeits of our own behaviour, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and the stars, as if we were villains on necessity, fools by heavenly compulsion, knaves, thieves, and treachers by spherical predominance, drunkards, liars, and adulterers by an enforced obedience of planetary influence, and all that we're evil in by a divine thrusting on, an admirable evasion of whoremaster man to lay his goatish disposition on the charge of a star. The stars have also long been considered to have a powerful bearing on health. As an example, when the first major flu outbreaks hit Italy in the 16th century, they attributed the new affliction to influenza di stelle, or the influence of the stars, leading to the word we now know well in English, influenza. The idea that stars influence people and events on Earth lost its accepted status in the 18th century Enlightenment, which promoted the use of reason and evidence-based knowledge. However, the idea that stars have power over the Earth and people didn't die, it stuck around. It persists even to the present time. For example, today, star signs and the zodiac are considered by some to be able to predict a person's temperament and life events. And even 20th century scientists have also explored the possible influence of stars. British astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle was professor at Cambridge between the 1940s and 1970s. This was the scientist that proposed the theory of stellar nucleosynthesis and coined the term Big Bang. In 1979, he published with Chandra Wickramasinghe a book named Diseases from Space, which proposed that diseases including influenza, colds, and whooping cough had extraterrestrial origins. This cited likely examples as the Spanish flu of 1918 and the Plague of Athens in 429 BCE. This thesis, as you may imagine, has proved controversial with the rest of the scientific community, but it's an intriguing concept. And this idea that viruses have celestial origins has even inspired novels like Michael Crichton's 1969 The Andromeda Strain. So going back to Cor Caroli, Robo Carolinum, and the globes at Ham, naming stars in honour of people wasn't just flattery, it was a serious thing that could have serious consequences. The Globes project first began in 2022 when we identified and applied for the funding, and this has resulted, as you can see on the screen, this wonderful pair of globes returning home to Ham only a few months ago, following the completion of the conservation work. The project has given me the opportunity to explore the world of globes and stars, and I've loved sharing some of what I've discovered with you tonight. If you would like to come and see Ham's Senex globes up close and in real life, they're being exhibited at Ham until the end of October half term in the back parlour on the ground floor. They will also feature as part of our conservation tours on November weekdays, and we have enjoyed taking inspiration from the celestial globe for our starry Christmas theme this year, which is live from the 29th of November until the 4th of January. Please come and visit. I'd like to conclude by sharing some further reading for those interested, including Sylvia's brilliant books. I can really recommend them. She really is the go-to expert on globes and globes conservation. And a thank you to everybody who's been involved in the conservation research, display, and sharing of the globes, including Sylvia Samira, Emily Vine, and the wonderful staff and volunteers at Ham House and Garden. And a huge thank you to you for coming to this talk.
Thank Hannah very much for that absolutely fascinating talk. There are lots of things that I was jotting down, things that I didn't know at all, and we're going to take them up further in the questions. Before we move to questions, which we'll do in just a moment, I want to point out that we only have 3 more talks left this year. Our next one will be on the 2nd of October when we'll hear from a speaker from Fulham Palace. Then we have Chiswick House. And then lastly, in December, we have one of our new speakers from Twickenham Museum. So thank you very much, Hannah, for setting us in this wonderful direction. So let's now go over